How Finnish soldier accidentally overdosed on Nazi meth pills during World War II battle, sparking a 2-week trip that ended with him half-naked and badly wounded in a ditch eating a raw bird before he was rescued alive. Whether it's a few too many glasses of wine after work or too many slices of pizza on the sofa at home, we've all ended up feeling worse for wear after overindulging. But perhaps none of us have ended up feeling as bad as Amo Koivunen, a Finnish soldier who accidentally took a squad's worth of Nazi methamphetamine pills while fleeing Soviet soldiers on skies during the Second World War. Amo hoped the pills would give him enough energy to escape the pursuing Red Army, which they did, though he also outran his own unit, got lost, and ended up spending 2 weeks skying around the Arctic Circle while high out of his mind. During that time, he traveled a total of 250 miles, including back through the middle of the Soviet camp, stepped on a landmine which blew his right foot off, and ended up half-naked eating a raw bird in a ditch before somehow being found alive. The incredible story took place in March of 1944 when Finland, fighting a years-long on-off conflict with Russia over its eastern provinces, was in an alliance of convenience with Hitler's Germany. Amo, then 27 years old, was on day 2 of a 3-day mission behind Soviet lines with a squad of fellow Finns and who'd been on the move almost non-stop when they ran into a Soviet patrol around 10 a.m. on March 18. A firefight broke out and Amo's unit was forced to flee, skying through knee-deep snow to avoid being encircled and captured. At first they made good ground, but soon Amo began falling behind. With his squad disappearing on the trail ahead and the Soviets getting closer, he knew he had to do something to tip the balance. It was then that he took out a packet of Nazi Pervitin pills from his breast pocket, methamphetamine that was given to Hitler's troops to give them an edge in battle. Amo, a straight-laced kid who abhorred the idea of taking the pills, had been entrusted to carry the squad's whole supply, which he promptly tipped into his hand because it was too difficult to extract a single pill while wearing mittens. In a moment of madness, Amo swallowed the whole handful and, within minutes, found he had more than enough energy to escape his Soviet pursuers. Not only did he escape the Soviets, but he quickly overhauled his own squad. When they eventually caught up with him, they noticed something was badly wrong. Amo was hallucinating and barely coherent. Concerned as much for their safety as his, the squad took away Amo's ammunition. Shortly afterwards, he suffered the first of what would become a series of prolonged blackouts. When he was alone, unarmed, and badly disoriented. Somehow he had managed to travel almost 40 miles from his last known position and was now lost in -15 C temperatures, with no idea how to get safely back to camp, while a squad's worth of Nazi meth coursed through his system. As Amo later recalled in a memoir, the next several days were a blur during which he was on the move near constantly and suffered a series of vivid hallucinations. At one point, he recalled speaking with friends from back home. He also spent a night skiing towards what he thought was a lit cabin on the horizon, which turned out to be the North Star. He also fought a wolverine that turned out to be a tree branch. During that time, he subsisted upon snow that he melted in a cooking pot to make water and pine needles that he boiled into a kind of broth. Perhaps the most bizarre episode involved Amo skiing towards a camp full of men that he took to be his Finnish comrades in the hopes of being rescued, but which turned out to be the same Soviet soldiers he had escaped days beforehand. Unable to turn around in time to avoid them, Amo ended up skiing straight through the middle of their camp, initially causing confusion as they mistook him for one of their own. "What a situation," Amo wrote. "The ones in the middle of the camp, the ones I mistook as Krauts, were laying in a lean-to shelter without snowsuits, and when I skied by, they would only move their winter boots a little to the side, out of my way. They must have been the same group that chased us on the road." Eventually, the Soviets recognized Amo and gave chase a second time, sparking what he called the scariest race of my life through a frozen swamp and snow-covered pine forests. After a day of hard hiking, Amo managed to escape the Soviets before stumbling upon an abandoned cabin. He went inside and decided to warm himself up by lighting a fire. But in his disoriented state, Amo lit the blaze in the middle of the wooden floor. He then fell into a fitful sleep as the cabin burned around him, waking each time the flames got too close, only to move slightly further away and go back to sleep. Somehow he managed to get out of the burning cabin before it collapsed on top of him, before stumbling on a second shelter, an abandoned Nazi military camp. But unbeknownst to Amo, the departing soldiers had booby-trapped it. He first trod on a landmine which blew most of his right foot to pieces, then stumbled to a cabin and opened the door, only for a second explosion to throw him 30 feet into a nearby ditch. Surrendering to what appeared to be a certain fate, Amo stayed in the ditch for what he estimated to be a week in temperatures as low as -30°C, with only a few small fires to keep him warm and a raw bird to eat, which he caught with his bare hands. He was eventually found by a patrol of Finns, though there were not enough of them to carry him back in his badly wounded state, so they left him with a promise that a rescue party would return. To Amo's surprise, the rescue party did come back for him, and he was hauled to a nearby field hospital where he was patched up. It was here that he learned he had been missing for 2 weeks, and it later transpired he had skied some 250 miles in that time. When he reached the hospital, his heart was going at 200 beats per minute, against an average resting heart rate around 80. He weighed just 6.5 stone. Despite the traumatic experience, Amo survived the war and went on to have a family and live to the old age of 71. He died in 1989. His son Micah later recalled how his father didn't like to discuss his time in the war, but in 1978 wrote down the experience of his meth trip for a competition a magazine was holding. It took second place. It's hard to say whether Pervitin helped him or not, because if he hadn't overdosed, he wouldn't have fought off the squad and wouldn't have been running around in the cold. On the other hand, maybe he wouldn't have been able to break away from the chase. He later published a book he called The Pervitin Patrol. How this story is even possible is of course hard to say. Witnesses are a bit soft-spoken. Well, he was definitely missing for 2 weeks in the woods and was injured in an explosion. And who the hell knows what he was imagining from that story? Well, it sounds amazing, even somehow makes you think and look at the people of that time in a new way.